So we will start with you, Ashley, to set us up. And we'll see. I'm hoping the video link works effectively. We know the power is on, but you never know about comms. But we look forward to some contributions from Lisa Maria in a moment. But the role of technology. I mean, of course, everyone knows AWS. With no need to have a special introduction. But tell us, how do you see the role of that technology backbone and all that's being enabled by technology in this question of sustainability? Can you give us a couple of quick provocations?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to start with a presentation first, Vijay.
Sure, even better. Let's do that. Do we have the video?
On Edward, yeah.
Let me ask my team. Let's run the video.
So super excited today, everyone, to talk about how AI and technology can really revolutionize and accelerate the sustainability agenda for Africa. And I think the formatting went a bit off here, but that's okay. What we really do is we want to democratize access to technology to drive environmental and social outcomes. And those outcomes cannot be talked about at 10,000 feet. We want to talk about them in a very real world use case scenario. So we have a couple of use cases we want to discuss. And we want to talk about it from the perspective of Africa solutions for Africa, where we need to be hyper-local about how we build these solutions with partners like Digital Africa, who's on stage with us today. So we can't talk about sustainability only in relation to the environment. Today, Vijay, I think we want to talk about it in relation to public health, where we know that disproportionately low-lying communities and rural populations are affected by climate change. We want to talk about it in terms of food security, where crop yields and crop growth have been affected by natural disasters. And of course, education, because how can we call ourselves sustainable if not every child has access to education, and if we don't prepare the next generation with the right skills in sustainability and business? So without further ado, I want to talk about how we would love to partner with everyone in this room. And I think the formatting seems to be a bit off the colors, but I'll just talk through what's there on the slide. But really, it's technology solutions and technical expertise that we can use, as Vijay said, to leapfrog. Right? We're very much behind the 1.5 degree mitigation. So we need to catch up, and technology and AI are critical to helping us achieve that. We also need to ensure it's affordable. And that's why we've made a commitment to provide technical grants, financial grants, as long as those workloads are driving environmental and social outcomes. So the intersection, as we talked about, of sustainability, we want to talk about that first use case with data. And we all know that garbage in, garbage out. So how can we get good quality data that's scalable and cost effective? And here's a good example where we build a digital map of Africa's ecology using satellite imagery that's of high quality and cheap and freely available from NASA, NOAA, JAXA, ESA, etc. And what you want to really look at is to use AI in that map to be able to track things like tree canopy, forest health, forest change. And this provides our decision makers, our scientists, with real world data to drive empirical decision making. So that's the first case. And then, the example of this is with an organization called TerraPulse. And there are many more of these organizations that we can partner with, including many of you in the room, to drive some of this informed environmental change. Another example in food security, a major issue, of course, here in Africa. And here, the question is, how can we create scalable models that can be used across a continent, across countries, but also between continents? And so here we have an example of cheap IoT sensors that are embedded in farms, right? And you can provide these to smallholder farmers across Africa. And a company called Netatech is pioneering this. And these sensors feed AI, data on the optimal combination of soil, minerals, water, even sunlight at a crop level. So for cabbage or spinach or yam, what's the optimal mix for each and every type of crop? And that then creates, using Gen AI, creates models that can automate the farm's systems. Now, the beauty of this is if we can make this open source and provide it to every smallholder farmer in sub-Saharan Africa, imagine the impact on the savings of water, soil, minerals, etc., and the impact on the environment. We switch over to education. We can't drive this change, and I think as Vijay said, it's tactics, strategy, and culture. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. right? So we can't talk about this unless we equip our next generation with the right skill sets and mindsets. And so in Nigeria, we're working with the President's Office to support our 3MTT program to scale up 300,000 learners in those skill sets up to 3 million by 2027. Real quick now to healthcare. And we talk about healthcare and how that has been an issue that we see human suffering and the human condition being exacerbated by climate change. And so, again, same question, what are the solutions out there that can help us to scale quickly? And an example here is using AI from a company called Huron, which created a super app called Kuzika, which means heal. It means heal in Rwanda, some of you may know. You know, in Rwanda, it's got 13, 14 million people. There's less than 15 oncologists in the country. And across SSA, Sub-Saharan Africa, there's only one oncologist for every 3,000 patients. And in America, it's 1 to 300. This problem isn't going away. So we use technology here to create an app that helps to store data on patient outcomes and interventions so that there's repeatability and scalability through this mobile app that it can't substitute the work of a doctor, but it certainly complements. And by doing so, it has freed up 40% of consultation time of doctors across the continent. Finally, in disaster response. And how can well, the words are kind of hidden, but I'll talk through it. In Kenya, we had a devastating flood. How can AI be used to drive responses to climate-induced disasters? And that's where we use drone imagery, satellite data, terrain modeling, elevation modeling to provide that to governments in Kenya, in Rwanda, in South Africa for search and rescue and disaster agencies to use. And this requires the power of the cloud and AI to do that mapping and analytics of your heat map of where the disaster has the most impact and where it's forecasted to impact in the next few days and weeks, which are critical. So with that, Vijay, that's some of the quick use cases across sustainability in this intersection, and look forward to sharing more with Digital F Africa.
That's great. Thank you, Ashley. And I was pleased to see that you didn't use the opportunity of using slides to bore us with irrelevant and sort of pontificating talking points, but instead got concrete, gave us examples, specific projects, companies. That's what we want to get to. We want to roll up our sleeves and see the applications of these technologies. So I'm very pleased to have that intervention. Let's see if we can run the video from Lisa Maria. Can we have that now, please?
Good morning, Vijay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, there you are. Okay, fantastic. We have you live. And although you're very tiny, maybe I guess you want to show your presentation. Bear in mind, you probably didn't hear earlier in the day, I did have an exhortation against boring and impenetrable PowerPoint. So I encourage you to go beyond those.
Yes, I promise to try to avoid to gas bag you all. I hope you can see the presentation now. I'm sharing this.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Excellent. So good morning. Thank you for the introduction. I'm going to focus on one key aspect, which is around the use of Earth observation data, some of which Ash has just mentioned. So Earth observing satellites have been collecting images of Africa's land, our water for the past 40 years, and providing vast amounts of data for monitoring and managing these natural resources, as well as the human and climatic impact on them. Digital Earth Africa is an African-led program which provides access to these data and related products to users across sectors, really addressing the issue that they're not being fully exploited across the continent, particularly when we look at how they're being used to inform sustainable development agendas in other parts of the world. A World Economic Forum Insight report, which was published around the time of the launch of Digital Earth Africa, quantified the program's potential impact, looking at 3 key areas: accelerating industry growth, boosting agricultural productivity, and increasing effective regulation of mining. And it highlighted that even under conservative assumptions, the contribution of the program to the African economy could be higher than $2 billion a year. But while these satellite images are a rich source of information, many are freely available, they're difficult to acquire, process, and scale up. And Digital Earth Africa addresses this by providing a continental scale data infrastructure, so really focusing on the economy of scale. for all African countries that democratizes the capacity to access, process, and analyze these data. So it's supported by AWS Cloud and the Open Data Cube technology. So this is what's exciting for us. This really is Africa leading here across the world. We currently have over 5 petabytes of data hosted by AWS in Cape Town, and this supports technology pipelines that enable near real-time, large-scale, rapid analysis, converting these vast amounts of satellite imagery into actionable insights for all African countries. So in addition to providing the satellite images themselves, such as the ones that you're seeing at the moment on the screen for the Senegal River, this is a snapshot of a year's change in the agriculture, the floodplains of the river in high spatial resolution data, which means very detailed. We also provide operational co-designed continental services, which are validated by partners across the continent, addressing the Sustainable Development Agenda. So all of our data and services, as well as all of our training materials, are freely available for all users, including commercial users. I'm going to look very briefly at 2 of our services, one which is more mature, one which has just been released, which address the continent's coastlines and water bodies. Coast serve as major hubs for 38 African countries, and the African blue economy is expected to be worth over $400 billion and employ more than 57 million people by 2030. But rising sea levels, rates of coastal erosion represent a pressing threat, and effective management and mitigation of these risks really requires consistent and regularly updated data across the continent. So the Digital Earth Africa Coastlines Monitoring Service summarizes 20 years of change. So from the year 2000, now it's actually 24 years of change, for 60,000 kilometers of coastline. So updated annually, this service is the first of its kind for the continent, produced on the continent. And the service provides an interactive and free access to hotspots of change. So red spots showing where the coastline is retreating inland, blue dots show where it's retreating, where it's advancing marine into the ocean. Average annual rates of change in meters calculated over the past 24 years, as well as the average position of the annual shorelines. So each of those 24 shoreline positions. We also provide, of course, uncertainty estimates alongside this. So this coastline service is ready to use, and it's already being implemented by many countries and agencies across the continent. And an assessment has demonstrated that by mitigating coastal erosion risks in 3 sectors, infrastructure and agriculture, fisheries and insurance, this service could improve the lives of 270 million people and inject over $500 million into Africa's economy annually. A new service that we've just released a couple of months ago really addresses the issue that Africa is on the forefront of climate change. And for many of our communities, that change, the impacts are going to be felt through water. So this was produced based on demand and from many of our users across over 25 countries. What it does is it summarizes 40 years of satellite observations, identifying over 700,000 unique water bodies across the continent. In addition to the location and extent, we update this on a weekly basis. So for each of those 700,000 individual water bodies, you can access the time series of surface water extent from when the satellite observations were first available, and then updated on a weekly basis going forward, which enables our users to identify the persistence of seasonal water bodies, where there is water at any point in time, and how that is changing. So to conclude, in summary, Digital Earth Africa is currently the world's largest operator of the open data cube infrastructure. It's a free platform for accessing satellite imagery specific to the African continent, and it's also hosted on the continent, supported by AWS Cloud. And by packaging Earth observation data into accessible and free data sets, African governments, industry players, and decision makers can track changes across the continent in unprecedented detail. And I'll just finish by saying that as a program built on partnerships, we are open to any form of collaboration, and we invite you to join us and help us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa Maria. We appreciate it. And I also thank you for giving us concrete examples, which again sort of brings to life a topic like this. Now, let me turn to our speakers on stage to have a discussion about what you've shared with us and what we've heard from Ashley thus far. Mpho, maybe I can turn to you. We heard from your colleague a perspective on a couple of the services, including the new one that's offered. These are very interesting, right? In the abstract, you can only say they sound great.
Yeah.
But in practice, I'm sure there's a lot more complexity that's hidden inside, right? In my experience, I've seen lots of technologies that have been offered up as magic solutions over the years, last couple of decades, for environmental problems. And among the various reasons why it doesn't always work out, sometimes they're not fit for purpose. Often people who promote technologies are keen to promote the technologies that they're good at, and not necessarily attuned to the user's needs and how exactly the problems might address them. So there's a mismatch between top up and bottom down, bottom up and top down. Sometimes it's a question of cost, although I understand some of these are free, but there may be other associated costs that people need to adapt the way that they work. So it's back to culture. And the final problem I've noticed, of course, is data deluge, that there's just too much information and people don't know what to do with it. From your organization's perspective, how do you help those whom you want to help actually take advantage of these really extraordinary kinds of new possibilities that technology is making happen?
And that's a very good question. And I'd first just like to say Digital Earth Africa is completely built on partnerships with a lot of partners across the continent. So we don't just sit down at Digital Earth Africa as a scientist and say, oh, we probably need a water product. Let's do that. No, we rather depend on our implementing partners who are mandated to work in different parts of the continent to tell us what are the needs on the ground. What do people want? For instance, with the water bodies product, people wanted to know how over time the water bodies have been changing. And they don't want to go into a platform where they would have to search and look. They just want a time series. They want a graph. And that's why we created that. And that's another value of Digital Earth Africa. We make it so easily digestible. You can just go onto the Our Maps platform, click on a water body, and it comes up. You don't need to know any coding. You don't need to know anything. But we do find that in Africa, a lot of people, they're committed to how they work. So it's very difficult to get them to change and adapt.
Not just Africa, that's around the world. Yeah.
Yeah, they're very, they want to do things the way they've been doing them because they feel, oh, you're coming up with all these great technologies that could potentially replace me at my job. So why would I take it up if I'm not going to be needed anymore? If I'm not going to be needed to analyze the satellite imagery because you already did it, what's the point? So that is one of our major challenges, just the uptake and the willingness to take this free product that's available because we have the funding and we just want to make it really available so people can actually use it to make strategic decisions on the continent and inform policies that make lives better.
And when we talk about partners, let me encourage my audience here. Remember, we had a deal, folks. I want questions from you. Use your technology. Use the Slido. Send some interesting questions. It's a fascinating opportunity and set of topics we have here on this session. The partners you're talking about, do you typically work with communities or with NGOs, or are you working with governments? What is the capacity of the organizations you're working with when you talk about partnerships?
Well, it's a variety, but mostly it's government institutions and NGOs as well that are mandated to cover as many countries in Africa as possible. For instance, with the RCMRD in East Africa and Kenya, they work across 20 countries. So we don't have to worry about ourselves going there to push the mandate of Digital Earth Africa. They can go onto the ground and say, Digital Earth Africa is here. This is how you can use this. This is how we've been using it. So it's mostly government institutions. And now in the third phase of Digital Earth Africa, we are focusing on embedding ourselves into government because we see that it's more prudent that people in government take it up than we go down to the ground because the technical expertise don't actually exist. There's also an internet issue. But if the government can take it up, they can filter it down. So we're almost training the trainers.
You make it a white label product. The government can take the credits and be more capable. You're okay with that, are you?
We're okay with that.
You must be very humble. There we go.
Add something to that.
Yes, so please join them. So actually, I'm going to come to you next.
Just to your question about how do you overcome this idea of vested interest and people making shiny new things that may not be the most useful? I think marrying both points, we need to overcome that by having some kind of digital public good and some kind of, the idea of the digital commons. And so the satellite data that Digital Africa uses and analytical tools, most of it is free. It's free because we made a commitment to say data that's useful for humanity, and that includes environmental data, should be free and open access and open source. So we have one of the largest sources of open data called the Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative that any of you in the room can use. And to your point as well, Vijay, we need to, democratize and spread the power among the people. So what DEA does is that they actually look at citizen science. They give citizens the power to access their platform, not just the people who are technical or have resources, and help communities to address things like food insecurity and disasters.
So actually, I know that it'll be appreciated that these services are free at the point of use. Nothing's ever free in life, as I've discovered. Google searches are not free. We give away our data, obviously. And so what is the broader question as to why one of the richest and most successful companies certainly of the last 30 years, is doing this? Do you see this as a philanthropic initiative, maybe win sort of hearts and minds, your social permission to operate in this market? Or do you see this as something else, maybe an opportunity for your government consulting division to get a camel's nose under the tent? So I'm going to, as I promised my audience, I'm going to push you on this. How free is free?
So we are the Tech for Good arm of AWS. And I can't speak for our peers in philanthropy, but we are very much driven by the social and environmental outcomes, not financial outcomes. And I can only speak for my team, which is the social responsibility and impact team. We are known as SRI within AWS. And that is a commitment made by our CEO at the group level, Andy Jassy, to say that doing good is good business. We also have that ingrained in our culture. You talked about that from Peter Drucker. So, just under 2 years ago, and some of you may have heard about Jeff Bezos' famous leadership principles. There were 14 for a long time. Today, there are 16. And the latest one is success and scale bring great responsibility. And so we have to live by those principles, even as a commercial company, but within that, as the philanthropic arm of AWS, that is our core mission, really, Vijay. Yeah.
The Slido is blowing up, for which I thank you all. I appreciate you being responsive. It is the hottest issue of the moment. It's a little bit off point, so I don't want us to spend all our time on this, but just a quick answer on the energy use of the AI itself. We all know this is one of the hot topics around the world. Clearly, you need energy to power data centers, particularly AI-focused energy data centers. Some of the big companies, including Amazon, but your competitors have recently supported nuclear power, including advanced nuclear, in the last couple of weeks. It's been the news. I wrote a lead story for us in The Economist about that. In the quest for clean, firm, carbon-free power, that's one example, but also renewables in other parts of the world. Here in a place like Africa, what is your answer to the few people who have challenged you saying, all this sounds great, but you're just going to use more power. Isn't this going to make the problem worse in terms of climate change? What is your company's philosophy on doing good without doing harm?
Yep. So I think there's two things. You mentioned these things require tremendous amounts of power. And that's here to stay, not just from a AWS or Amazon point of view. The Gen AI revolution is inherently powered by the cloud. It requires that kind of computing power. And we're going to see this, hardware cycles change over the next 4 to 5 years. The devices in your hands are going to be powered by new types of AI, and all of that is here to stay. The question is, what is that power being used for? Number one. And number two, where is that power coming from? And so on the first point, if that power is being used and harnessed for social and environmental outcomes that you described by Digital Africa, I think that's a win. And then the second is, and again, I guess I can speak for ourselves, we are the largest corporate buyer of renewable energy that not many people know about in the world. And so nuclear is actually one area, but really we have been buying and operating and owning solar, wind, thermal assets to power, and all of our data centers are scheduled to run on renewable energy. And we have also formed a climate pledge. We can't do it alone. And so we have to put our money where our mouth is. You can't just talk, you have to act.
Yeah.
So by 2040, we are pledged to be net zero carbon, excuse me. And we have 500 plus signatories that have joined us in that. And that complements the diversification of our energy assets with nuclear.
So this is certainly, it's self-serving to say it, but an area that I do follow very closely. We are seeing, and I've argued on the pages of The Economist, that the arrival of a rich green uncle in the shape of big tech is actually going to be a force that encourages innovation and possibly creates new opportunities for carbon-free, low carbon power around the world in an industry that frankly has not been very innovative. The global utilities industry has among the lowest rates of reinvestment in R&D innovation in the world, one of the least innovative big businesses on earth, in part because that's how we regulated it, right? We just keep the lights on and don't get too risky, don't try too many crazy things, is how, broadly speaking, the world has looked at this industry. That can no longer stand with the kind of growth, both from growth for poverty alleviation in a developing world, AI, particularly in the richer countries, but here too, I think the paradigm is shifting, and there is an opportunity to leapfrog even in this way, with again that rich green uncle turning up in the shape of big tech companies that need the power, have committed to net zero or even net negative goals, and are willing to take some interesting commercial risks with power purchase agreements and so on. So I would say watch this space. Here's one where I'm keeping an eye open. The International Energy Agency is convening a major summit on 4th and 5th of December with leading heads of both big tech companies, but also utilities, energy companies, to try to formulate some policies and regulations and good ideas for making this a green leapfrog rather than a dirty one. So let's see where that goes. Mpho, I want to come to you. We have a little bit of time remaining. Some of the examples we've dealt with talk about resilience. Can you talk about the role that digital technologies can play with the neglected part of the climate challenge, which is adaptation? We all know overwhelmingly resources go to mitigation, but renewables are being sexy at the moment, but much less goes to adaptation, helping communities, and that inevitably we're going to need to adapt much more aggressively. How can the data revolution you're talking about help with adaptation?
Yeah, so Digital Earth Africa is built on this idea of we're unlocking the promise of tomorrow from patterns of the past, because we have this large archive of imagery that we have available, and thanks to Amazon Web Services, we're able to analyze and put into a time series that tells us how things have been maturing over time. And with that, you're easily able to see what the future could potentially hold. For instance, with the Coastlines service, if the coastline is consistently eroding, you can easily make adaptation plans to move the people away from easily floodable areas. So it's information like that that you can get from the Digital Earth Africa platform, because we've analyzed 30 years of data. And that tells you that this problem is only just going to continue with time. So what are you going to do about it? So inform your adaptation plans instead of being reactive to what's about to happen, but rather plan for what might come in the future.
So that's a good example. Actually, I'm going to come back to you with a specific question on that, or challenge on this. There are a number of companies that have for-profit models to predict climate risk to property, for example. You know, if you want to buy property in the developed world, particularly, you can pay services for their predictive and analytics, or how much insurance companies are developing models like this. But in my experience, the first rule of data is garbage in, garbage out. So how good are we have past data, understandably, that's valuable. But when it comes to prediction of future, which is where adaptation relies on modeling, how strong is the evidence? How do you vet? And where do you have the confidence levels to tell people, hey, based on our analysis, this is where we see the coastline moving. This community should move or adapt in some way. That's a pretty bold thing for a government to do based on data that we may not yet be fully confident on. So how do you handle that challenge?
Should I take that one?
Yeah, sure. I can take it. From the Earth observation space, satellites take pictures. You can clearly see what's happening on the ground. So you're almost confident in what you're looking at. And because Digital Earth Africa conforms to standards that are set by international bodies in terms of what the minimum requirements for data quality are. So we're pretty confident in that what we're producing is actually good and can be used for predictive analysis and obviously inform then those adaptation plans. Yeah.
And, just to give a real life example of that, there's an organization called Climate OS. I encourage you to Google it. So they are doing exactly what you said, Vijay. You have all this data coming in from different sources, some of it reputable, like NASA, NOAA, Earth observatories, but some of it coming from various sources, private satellites, other types of sources. What Climate OS does is that they try to make sense of all that data. It's from a data mess to a data mesh. So the matrix of data.
I see what you did there.
It's just on the fly. So
Leave the writing to us.
yeah, taking a page from your book.
There you go.
Very good book, by the way.
Thank you.
So, they're able to predict in 20 years will this building be underwater. But the beauty of it, and I go back to this, is Climate OS makes all of this freely available. It's not going to cover every country, every building, every source, every climate event. But a lot of it is free from the year 1850 to the year 2100. That's how they go back in history and forward.
Fantastic. Okay, well, you've given us a lot to think about. Obviously, very exciting area, especially the fact that it's open access and available. I think will be of great interest to people in this room and in this region. So why don't we give our speakers a round of applause and thank them with their efforts.
Thank you, Vijay. Thank you so much. Fun.
Thank you.
That was fun. Really good one.